Hello, everyone. Welcome to part two of our deep dive into the Cessna 182, where I'm talking about kind of my experiences with it, as well as kind of showing you sort of the ins and outs of it. For this video, we're going to be heading up to our cruise altitude, kind of managing the mixture, doing a little bit of navigation, and then, of course, we're going to start our great descent down into Bedford up there near Boston. Let's take a look. So first things first, we've got ourselves climbing pretty smoothly here. I'm actually going to flip on the automatic pilot. The reason I'm doing this now, of course, is we've gotten pretty darn close to where we need to be. I'm actually crossing that lovely magenta line of safety. We've been climbing for just a little bit here. Our cruise altitude today is only 3,500 feet, which is pretty low as far as cruise altitudes go. This aircraft definitely will go very high, and since it's a turbocharged aircraft, it can go extra high, and I mean really extra high. Let me show you. There we go. Much better. We're now at 12,000 feet. Now, the reason this is such an interesting thing is we're just getting started with climbing with this aircraft. And you're probably saying, what do you mean you're just getting started? You're at 12,500 feet. Isn't that enough? Well, if you come over here, you'll notice I'm still making 32 inches of mercury. And you'll also probably observe that I'm still making 2,400 RPM. One of the things we had to do during climb, by the way, is constantly sit here and fits with the mixture in order to keep it properly lean, which is what that little line there is for. But you can see we're easily making 100. We're actually making 125 true up here. And the air is rarefied, my friend, and it looks beautiful. Now, one of the things I always like to warn people about is one of the laws that we have to deal with is the magical 12,500 foot line. The reason that's important to us, of course, is that when we cross over that line, we get a half an hour before we need supplemental oxygen. So this is a pretty safe altitude for us, but believe it or not, this aircraft can go substantially higher. The thing you have to remember is while you're climbing with this airplane, you're going to be constantly fixing with this mixture. One of the things they did to make us really easy with the mixture is if you actually go like this, there's this little line they give you just to kind of help you give kind of a nice little reference point as to what it is. Now, why I have to fix with the mixture on a fuel-injected aircraft with a turbocharger, I'm not quite sure. That's part of me doesn't like that, but it's perfectly fine. One thing we did forget to do during our last video is we forgot to actually turn on the transponder there, so I'm actually going to engage that real quick, because it's probably helpful because we're going to be flying into Boston pretty soon. Now, at altitudes like this, we have a brand new set of problems that we're going to have to be coping with. Obviously, there's the cold air. That's one problem that's easily rectified. By the way, if you've ever played with the Cessna 182, when you pull this thing out, just let's say, I don't know, a fingernail width, that's enough to melt your face. So I have no idea how much hot heat would be rolling out of that. But now that we're altitude, of course, I had to apply a little bit of power to kind of get us going. It's a good time to go ahead and get us all set up for cruise here. Obviously, it's pitch and power, so we're going to go ahead and do 24 inches of mercury here, and we're going to go ahead and reduce the power down to 2,300 RPM. On the Cessna 182P, I like 23 and 23. It's a very easy number to remember. And of course, we can go ahead and slam the cowl flaps closed here once we've gotten to the cruise altitude that we desire. We're pretty high up right now. Like I said, this is substantial. This is so high, not that we can glide to our destination, but I kid you not, the destination is right there. So it just gives you an idea of just the impressive capability this particular version of the Cessna 182 is capable of. So of course, once we get up here, the one thing we do is we play the kind of mixture game, and it's really easy to do. We simply lean the mixture and we watch this little needle, and what's going to happen is you're going to see your turbine temperature is going to massively increase, and you're going to see the turbine temperature continues to peak. Here we go. You can see how far out it is, by the way. Going up. Did you see how the gas per hour started going down? Watch what the turbine temperature does. Watch this. Too much. Perfect. So all I did is pulled it out until it did that. Then I pushed it in a couple clicks. And now we're beautifully set. Our gallons per hour is really well set here. Turbine inlet temperature is really well set. Cylinder head temperature is kind of high, but once you start getting the air moving over it, we start picking up speed. And one of the impressive things here is I'm getting a true airspeed of 143 knots. When I usually plan for the Cessna 182 in the real world, I usually plan for 136. That's like kind of my go-to speed, if that makes sense, kind of a thing like that. It seems to work pretty well. Like I said, not too many surprises there. When we're at cruise, of course, after we manage to get this cabin all nice and warmed up, which takes a pretty concerted effort. Trust me on that. But like I said, the people in the back seat are going to be popsicles by the time this flight is over. The people in the front seat, you're going to feel like you've been in a sauna for hours. It's welcome to general aviation, everyone. That's what you have to put up with. It's just kind of one of those things. So in the previous version of the 182, of course, we'd have to deal with resetting our compass and directional gyros, but we don't have to. Our mixtures are all nice and set. Our systems are set. We're navigating quite nicely on our little magenta line of safety. And now it's time to start thinking about descent. What? Descent, you say? Well, let me show you a problem we have. 12,500 feet at 500 feet per minute means 25 minutes of descent time if we want to do things smoothly. Obviously, if we want to be a little bit quicker there, we could do 1,000 feet per minute, which would mean we have 12.5 minutes of descent, which is Not bad, because if you take a look at our current time here, we have 17 minutes 50 to get to our destination. The other option, of course, we could use is if we wanted to get a little more creative, we could use some VNAV action, which is actually pretty effective with this plane. A little easier when you have some of the other versions. Now, if I were to come over here to my pages, we could come in here, of course, we could dial in. We have our VNAV vertical speed target. Of course, we could dial in our components in here, and I'll play with that. But to be honest, for a flight this short, I'm not going to fight that because it's just going to take a little while to kind of get all this thing set up. Not going to worry about it. Instead, we're just going to use 12 and a half minutes as our basis to begin our descent down into Bedford. Like I said, our destination altitude, we need about 1,200 feet for the flight pattern there. There are other options, of course, on this aircraft that we could utilize for the purposes of navigation. Obviously, the G1000 and the GPS is a fantastic tool, but believe it or not, we do still have conventional navigational tools here. We have VOR and ILS over here on the left. For example, we want to pop over to my favorite 11490. You'll see that that will pop up, and of course, it'll say Hartford VOR, and if we wanted to see where that actually is, we could actually come down here. We could come down here and set this to bearing, and it will actually indicate the position of that. You can see Hartford is basically 34 nautical miles behind us at that particular heading coming out their back way, which is pretty cool. And the other thing we could do too, which is kind of cool here, so you could actually do DME and you could read out how far it is if you're flying something like a DME arc, for example, which is, whoo-hoo, that is wow, that's a lot of work to fly a DME arc. Of course, we have our wind display if we needed to. We can shut the synthetic vision off. I've done tutorials on this device. I'm not going to get into too much detail, but it's generally the stuff you do other than going like this and looking around trying to find traffic. I remember one great story when I was flying down, basically the Northeast Corridor is the best way to describe it, Route 95. We got a fantastic little call warning saying there's an aircraft maneuvering aggressively. I've told this story before, but I remember we're all like, what does that mean? So we're all crouching and doing one of these, looking out the windows, trying to find the traffic. And there's this guy going, what? Oh, whoa, oh, woo, like that for basically just watch him kind of do one of these, doing that constantly. And it's just one of those where I'm like, all right, kind of a thing like that. All right, let's fast forward to the top of descent. All right, about 30 seconds to go before top of the descent. So we're going to go ahead and cue in our desired altitude. We're going to go down to 1,100 feet here, which looks perfectly good for us. And once we hit 1230, we can go ahead and push the nose over to get going. Now, for me, I'm a huge fan. I mean, I love having all these fancy autopilots. I'm not as spoiled with an autopilot this nice in the version of the 182 that I get to fly around in. So a lot of stuff I do is I point the plane where I want it, then I turn the autopilot back on. This seems to work really, really well. A lot of these airplanes have something called CWS, control wheel steering, which is a button you can actually push, and you can actually fly the plane, let go, and the autopilot takes it back from you. It's just wonderful and absolutely fantastic. There we go, top of descent. It sounded so disappointed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick the nose over just a tiny bit here. This is as much as it takes, just like that. And all I'm going to do is establish my descent speed here. You'll notice probably that I'm really doing nothing as far as reducing power here. We generally want to keep the power up during our descent, which is one of those things where in my early days of flying, that's just not how you did things. And it's very weird to think that's where I've gone, so to speak, how that's sort of changed for me. And I can see right now I'm getting about 135 knots indicated, which is going to slowly get up as we start to go ahead and descend more. Go ahead and give it a couple more taps of trim. It's going to take a pretty aggressive amount of trim to keep this thing down. And what we're going to do is we're basically going to descend at our yellow line there. We're not going to go past it. Obviously, if you want to increase your descent rate at this point, and notice, by the way, I can flip that on, and notice, of course, it ignores you and immediately tries to climb back up. So a minute ago when I was saying it's much, much safer to just set what you need to set and go, I was not joking. So I'm going to go ahead and settle this thing out. Like I said, 140 is going to be a pretty good descent speed for us. So we actually need to come to the right just a little bit here as we continue this. And I've not touched my power settings. The one thing you got to keep in mind, though, is as you descend, every minute you're going to have to basically knock off an inch of mercury. The reason for that, of course, is we're in the process of getting into thicker air, and we really don't want to be traveling through thicker air and gradually increasing power. What we really, really want to be doing is actually reducing our power so that it stays more or less constant all the way down. Another thing you got to watch out for, too, is going to be cooling. Our engine, of course, right now is very, very well lean. I have to actually enrich the mixture a tiny bit here. And, of course, we have the cowl flap slam closed with a ton of airflow, so that's going to basically facilitate a pretty aggressive cooling here. So that's just something we got to kind of be mindful of, kind of a thing like that. So one thing we can do, of course, is I can shut the alt mode off, but that's perfectly fine. I can also do one of these things and get it to ignore. I'm actually kind of surprised about that because normally what we do is we tap the arm button like that, and then, of course, it knows we're looking for vertical speed, autopilot on, nav. There we go, and now it's going to go ahead and hold this. 145 is much too fast for us, so what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to make a little power reduction here. Keeping it in the green arc is the important part here more than anything, because if we get outside of the green arc, it's going to give us all sorts of nasty problems. If we get too far into the yellow and we hit turbulence, we're going to break something. Obviously, if we get too far out of the green arc here, our engine's going to cool down. Welcome to the fun of complex aircraft, by the way. All right, so as we descend, we're just going to kind of gently feed mixture back in. We don't need a ton of it because, believe it or not, you'll pick it up pretty quick. Just keep an eye on your manifold pressure. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to speed up time. So you can just sort of watch how things change as we descend here. Go ahead and back my throttle out just a tiny bit. Like I said, I'm trying to stay inside that arc the best I can. 20 inches is definitely going to be my floor. I could definitely increase the RPM just a tiny bit if I needed to. That's going to give me a pretty good distance. One thing we have to keep an eye out for, like I said, is that fuel flow is going to fluctuate quite a bit because, again, now our air-fuel mixture is no longer even. Again, I'm surprised they modeled it that way. I realized turbochargers, it should be pretty consistent. Like I said, I'm not quite sure what they were going for there, but that's just how we're going to have to kind of manage it, sort of thing. All right, go flip navigation mode back on. Might as well. There we go. Just come back to the right in a second. You can see we're descending perfectly. We got a great speed here. We've got our engine well within the green arc. We got a good descent rate, a good amount of descent time. Bedford's are right off our 12 o'clock there. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically fly left, and then we're going to come down into a landing here. And that's going to set us up pretty well. Now, when you're flying into a landing with this aircraft, one of the weird things you have to remember is if you go all the way back to the beginning of our first video, we discussed a little bit about kind of the challenge of this airplane as far as getting it to slow down and then being able to keep it fast enough to facilitate a landing because of the gigantic flaps. But that's something we're going to deal with the next video. Enjoy.